While interviewing a candidate for a job opening, the millionaire froze when he recognized the woman. She looked exactly like his beloved who vanished 26 years ago. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Thomas Lancaster's corner office on the 42nd floor, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk where he sat motionless, staring at a photograph he'd kept hidden in his drawer for 27 years. Isabel Monroe smiled back at him from the faded image, her emerald eyes sparkling with the kind of joy he hadn't felt since she vanished without a trace. At 53, Thomas had built an empire that stretched across 3 continents. Lancaster Textiles was worth more than most small countries' GDP, and his name commanded respect in boardrooms from New York to Shanghai. But all the money in the world couldn't fill the void that Isabel's disappearance had carved into his soul. He traced her face with his finger, remembering how she used to laugh at his terrible jokes, how she'd scrunch her nose when she was thinking hard about something. She'd been only 18 when she disappeared, barely more than a girl, but she'd been everything to him. His mother, Eleanor, had called it puppy love and insisted he'd get over it. 27 years later, he was still waiting. "Mr. Lancaster," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 10 o'clock appointment is here." Thomas quickly slipped the photograph back into the drawer. "Send them in, Martha." He straightened his tie and tried to focus on the task at hand. The Lancaster Foundation needed a new director of social projects, someone who could breathe life into their community outreach programs. He'd reviewed dozens of resumes, but none had impressed him until he'd seen Sophia Carter's application. Meanwhile, 300 miles south in Asheville, North Carolina, Elena Carter, the name Isabel Monroe had adopted when she'd fled her old life, stood in front of her bathroom mirror, fighting back tears as she did every morning for the past 27 years. At 45, she still looked younger than her age, though the weight of her secrets had etched fine lines around her eyes. "Mom, you okay in there?" Sophia's voice called from the kitchen. "Just getting ready for work, honey," Elena replied. Forcing brightness into her voice, she worked as a seamstress at the local alteration shop. A far cry from the life she might have had with Thomas, but she'd made her choice. Or rather, Eleanor Lancaster had made it for her. Elena still remembered that horrible day when Thomas's mother had cornered her outside the campus library. The older woman's face had been twisted with disgust as she'd shoved the forged letters into Elena's hands. "He never loved you," Eleanor had hissed. "Look at what he really thinks of you and that little mistake you're carrying." The letters, written in Thomas's handwriting, though Elena would never know Eleanor had hired a professional forger, were brutal. They called her a gold-digging opportunist and described the pregnancy as an obvious trap to sink her claws into the Lancaster fortune. The final letter had been the cruelest. "Get rid of it, or I'll make sure you disappear entirely." At 18 and 3 months pregnant, Elena had believed every word. She'd packed her few belongings that very night and taken a Greyhound bus as far as her savings would carry her. Now, as Sophia prepared for her interview in New York City, Elena felt that familiar twist of anxiety in her stomach. Her daughter was brilliant, ambitious, and beautiful. Everything Elena had dreamed she'd become. But New York was dangerous territory, too close to a past that could destroy them both. "I still can't believe you're moving to the big city," Elena said, as Sophia emerged from her bedroom. Looking professional in her navy blazer and pencil skirt, Sophia grinned, the same radiant smile that had once made Thomas's heart skip beats. "It's just an interview, Mom. Besides, it's time I spread my wings. I've been taking care of you long enough." "You've never had to take care of me," Elena protested. Though they both knew it wasn't entirely true, Elena's mysterious sadness had cast a shadow over Sophia's childhood, and her daughter had grown up wise beyond her years. "This foundation work sounds perfect for you," Elena continued, trying to sound supportive despite her growing panic. "What did you say the company was called again?" "Lancaster Textiles. They have this huge foundation that does community outreach. The CEO himself is conducting the interviews." Sophia paused, studying her mother's suddenly pale face. "Mom, you look like you've seen a ghost." Elena gripped the kitchen counter to steady herself. "Lancaster, after all these years, fate was playing its cruelest joke. I just worry about you in such a big company. These wealthy executives, they can be ruthless." "Don't worry about me," Sophia said, kissing her mother's cheek. "I can handle myself. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? Back in Manhattan, Thomas was asking himself the same question as he straightened the papers on his desk. He'd been having strange dreams about Isabel lately, more vivid than usual. In them, she was trying to tell him something important, but he could never quite make out the words. The office door opened, and Martha ushered in the candidate. "Mr. Lancaster, I'd like you to meet Sophia Carter." Thomas looked up from his papers, prepared to give his standard interview greeting, but the words died in his throat. Standing before him was Isabel Monroe, exactly as she'd looked 27 years ago. The same cascading auburn hair, the same heart-shaped face, the same emerald eyes that had haunted his dreams for decades. His hands began to tremble uncontrollably, and he had to grip the edge of his desk to keep from collapsing. The room seemed to spin around him as memories flooded back with devastating clarity. "Mr. Lancaster." Sophia's voice sounded far away, concerned. "Are you all right?" Thomas blinked hard, trying to focus. This couldn't be Isabel. Isabel would be 45 now, not 26. But the resemblance was so uncanny it was almost supernatural. Every feature, every expression, even the way she tilted her head slightly when she was worried. It was all exactly the same. Yes, I'm fine," he managed, his voice hoarse. "Please, have a seat." As Sophia settled into the chair across from his desk, Thomas noticed something that made his heart stop entirely. When she reached for her purse, her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a small birthmark on her left wrist. A perfectly formed star, exactly like the one Isabel had possessed. The same birthmark he used to trace with his finger when they lay together in the meadow behind the campus, planning a future that had been stolen from them both. "Mr. Lancaster," Sophia's voice seemed to come from underwater. "Should we reschedule? You really don't look well." Thomas forced himself to breathe, to think rationally. This was impossible. Isabel was gone, had been gone for 27 years. This young woman was just a coincidence, a cruel trick of genetics that happened to perfectly mirror the love of his life. But as Sophia began to speak about her qualifications, Thomas found himself studying every gesture, every inflection, the way she pressed her lips together when she was thinking, the musical quality of her laugh, when she made a small joke about her nervousness. It was all achingly familiar. "I've always been passionate about helping people," Sophia was saying, "especially those who've been forgotten by society. I believe everyone deserves a second chance. Don't you? A second chance." Thomas's chest tightened with an emotion he couldn't name. Hope, terror, or maybe both. "Miss Carter," he said slowly, "tell me about your family, your background." Something flickered in Sophia's eyes, a shadow of the same sadness he'd seen in Isabel's. "It's just my mother and me. She's had a difficult life. I've always felt like there was something she wasn't telling me about my father, but she gets so upset whenever I bring it up that I've learned not to ask." Thomas's pulse hammered in his ears. "What does your mother do?" "She's a seamstress in North Carolina. We've lived there my whole life. She never talks about the time before I was born, and sometimes I catch her crying when she thinks I'm not looking. It's like she's mourning someone who died, but she won't tell me who." The room was silent, except for the distant hum of traffic 42 floors below. Thomas stared at this impossible young woman who carried his lost love's face and wondered if he was losing his mind, or if fate had finally decided to give him the second chance Sophia had just mentioned. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "you're hired." Thomas hadn't slept in 3 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sophia's face morphing into Isabel's, heard her voice echoing through the corridors of his memory. He'd replayed their interview 1,000 times, analyzing every word, every gesture, searching for clues that might confirm or destroy the impossible possibility that had taken root in his mind. He stood at his office window, watching the city wake up below, when his phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "Sophia Carter's first day. She'll be here at 9 a.m. His hand shook as he set the phone down. In 2 hours, he'd have to face her again, pretend everything was normal when his entire world had been turned upside down by a 26-year-old woman who carried his lost love's face. Meanwhile, in her penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side, 79-year-old Eleanor Lancaster sat in her wheelchair, staring at the morning news without really seeing it. The arthritis in her hands had worsened over the years, but it was nothing compared to the pain that had been eating away at her conscience for 27 years. She remembered that day in 1997 with crystal clarity. Every cruel word she'd spoken, every lie she'd told. She'd been so certain she was protecting her son, saving him from what she'd seen as a gold-digging teenager who would ruin his future. The Lancaster name meant something, and she'd be damned if she'd let some nobody from a middle-class family tarnish it. But as the years passed and she watched Thomas turn into a shell of himself, Eleanor had begun to question everything. He'd never married, never had children, never seemed to find joy in anything. The empire he'd built felt more like a monument to loneliness than success. She'd hired private investigators over the years, trying to find Isabel Monroe, telling herself she just wanted to know if the girl was all right, but every lead had turned cold. It was as if Isabel had simply vanished from the face of the earth. What Eleanor didn't know was that her son was about to uncover the truth she'd spent decades burying. 27 years earlier, Isabel Monroe sat in the campus health center, staring at the positive pregnancy test in her trembling hands. At 18, she felt impossibly young to be making decisions that would affect the rest of her life. But when she thought about Thomas, his gentle smile, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, she felt a surge of unexpected joy. They'd been together for 8 months, and she was deeply, desperately in love. Thomas had talked about their future together, about the house they'd buy, the family they'd raise. A baby hadn't been part of their immediate plans, but maybe this was just fate's way of moving their timeline forward. She'd decided to tell him that evening when he picked her up for dinner. She'd even bought a little card with a stork on it, something sweet and hopeful to share the news, but she never got the chance. Eleanor Lancaster had been watching, waiting. She'd noticed her son's increasing attachment to the scholarship student from the wrong side of town, and she'd taken action. The private investigator she'd hired had discovered Isabel's pregnancy, before Isabel had even told Thomas. Eleanor intercepted Isabel outside the library, her face a mask of cold fury. "Miss Monroe," she'd said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We need to talk." Eleanor had come prepared. She'd hired a professional forger, a man who specialized in creating fake documents for divorce proceedings, to replicate Thomas's handwriting. The letters she'd shown Isabel were masterpieces of cruelty, each word carefully chosen to devastate. "Isabel, I can't believe you thought you could trap me with this pregnancy. Did you really think I was that stupid? You're nothing but a gold-digging opportunist, and I see right through you. The thought of being tied to you for the rest of my life makes me sick. You're not Lancaster material, and you never will be. Get rid of it, or I'll make sure you disappear entirely. My family has connections you can't even imagine. Don't test me." The letters had been accompanied by a check for $50,000. Abortion money, Eleanor had called it with disgust. Isabel had read each letter with growing horror, her heart shattering a little more with every word. This wasn't the Thomas she knew, the man who'd held her so gently, who'd whispered promises of forever against her hair. But the handwriting was unmistakably his, and Eleanor's cold satisfaction seemed to confirm every awful word. "He never loved you," Eleanor had said, watching Isabel's world crumble. "You were just a distraction, a phase he needed to get out of his system. Did you really think someone like my son would end up with someone like you?" Isabel had fled that very night, taking nothing but a small suitcase, and the devastating knowledge that the father of her child had never loved her at all. Present day, Sophia Carter stepped out of the elevator on the 42nd floor of the Lancaster building, her heart racing with first-day nerves. She'd barely slept, excited about the opportunity, but also haunted by her mother's strange reaction when she'd mentioned the company name. Elena had been acting weird ever since Sophia announced the interview, jumping at every phone call, checking the locks on their doors obsessively. When Sophia had pressed her about it, Elena had just mumbled something about rich people being dangerous and changed the subject. Martha greeted Sophia with a warm smile and led her through the pristine hallways to a corner office that would be hers. "Mr. Lancaster wanted you to get settled before your orientation meeting," Martha explained. "He's been very invested in making sure everything is perfect for your arrival." As Sophia unpacked her small box of personal items, she found herself thinking about the strange moment during her interview when Thomas Lancaster had seemed to freeze up completely. For a few seconds, he'd looked at her like he'd seen a ghost, his face draining of all color. She'd been worried he was having some kind of medical episode, but then he'd hired her on the spot, which was unusual according to Martha. Mr. Lancaster usually takes weeks to make decisions, the assistant had confided. He interviewed 15 candidates for this position over 2 months, but with you, he just knew. Sophia was arranging a small photo of her and Elena on her desk when she heard a knock on her open door. She turned to find Thomas Lancaster standing in the doorway and immediately noticed that same strange intensity in his eyes that had unsettled her during the interview. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "How are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you. Everyone's been incredibly welcoming." Sophia studied his face, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. "Are you feeling all right?" "Mr. Lancaster, you look like you haven't been sleeping." Thomas's breath caught. Isabel used to ask him the same question in exactly the same way, with that perfect blend of professional concern and genuine care. "I'm fine," he managed. "I wanted to discuss your first project. We're developing a new initiative for single mothers, providing job training, childcare support, educational opportunities. I thought someone with your background might have unique insights." Something flickered across Sophia's face. Surprise, maybe even pain. "My background. Growing up with a single mother," Thomas clarified, watching her reaction carefully. "It must have given you perspective on the challenges these women face." Sophia's expression grew guarded. "My mother did her best, but yes, it wasn't always easy. She worked constantly, but never seemed to get ahead, and she was always so sad, like she was carrying some terrible burden that she couldn't share." Thomas's heart clenched. "Did she ever talk about your father?" "Never." Sophia's voice grew quiet. "I used to ask when I was little, but it would make her cry so hard that I learned to stop. All she ever said was that he was a man who broke her heart so completely that she could never trust anyone again." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Sophia found herself studying Thomas's face, noting something familiar in his features that she couldn't quite place. There was a sadness in his eyes that reminded her of her mother's, a deep ache that seemed to have roots going back decades. "Miss Carter," Thomas said suddenly, "may I ask where you were born?" Sophia blinked in surprise. "North Carolina, Asheville, why? And your mother's name?" "Elena Carter." Sophia frowned. "Mr. Lancaster, these seem like very personal questions for a work discussion." Thomas nodded quickly, realizing he was overstepping. "You're right, I apologize. I want to make sure our programs are designed by people who truly understand the population we're trying to serve." But as Sophia excused herself to attend her orientation session, Thomas remained frozen in her doorway, his mind racing. Asheville, North Carolina, Elena Carter, a daughter born 26 years ago to a single mother who'd been heartbroken by a man she'd never trusted again. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture so impossible and yet so perfect that Thomas felt like he might collapse under the weight of it. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized years ago. "Detective Harrison, this is Thomas Lancaster. I need you to investigate someone for me." Discreetly, her name is Elena Carter, lives in Asheville, North Carolina. I need to know everything about her, where she came from, what her life was like before 1997. As he hung up the phone, Thomas caught his reflection in Sophia's office window. For the first time in 27 years, he saw something in his own eyes that he'd thought was lost forever: hope. Thomas had become a man obsessed. For the past week, he'd found excuses to walk past Sophia's office at least a dozen times each day, memorizing the way she moved, the expressions that flickered across her face, the unconscious habits that reminded him so achingly of Isabel. He watched her through his office window as she worked in the conference room, noting how she bit her lower lip when concentrating, exactly as Isabel had done when studying for exams. When Sophia laughed during a phone call with a program beneficiary, the sound carried through the glass walls and hit Thomas like a physical blow. It was Isabel's laugh, crystal clear and infectious, the same laugh that had once filled his world with light. "You're going to wear a hole in that carpet," Martha observed, watching him pace behind his desk. "And if you keep staring at Miss Carter like that, people are going to start talking." Thomas stopped mid-stride. "I'm not staring." Martha raised an eyebrow that suggested she'd been his assistant long enough to know better. "Mr. Lancaster, in 30 years of working for you, I've never seen you take such a personal interest in an employee. Should I be concerned?" Before Thomas could answer, his private line rang, Detective Harrison's name flashed on the caller ID. "I'll need some privacy, Martha." She nodded and closed the door behind her as Thomas answered the call. "What did you find?" Thomas asked without preamble. "It's interesting, Mr. Lancaster. Elena Carter moved to Asheville in September 1997, pregnant and alone. She had no credit history, no previous address, no family connections anyone could trace. It's like she materialized out of thin air." Thomas's pulse quickened. "What about before 1997? That's where it gets really strange. I found one connection, a birth certificate for Sophia Carter, born March 15th, 1998, father listed as unknown. But when I ran facial recognition software on an old driver's license photo of Elena Carter from 1998, the detective paused. "Sir, you're going to want to sit down for this. Just tell me." Elena Carter bears a striking resemblance to someone named Isabel Monroe, who attended Columbia University from 1996 to 1997 before disappearing without a trace. Same facial structure, same eye color, same bone structure. If they're not the same person, they're identical twins. The phone slipped from Thomas's nerveless fingers. Clattering to the desk, Isabel, alive, living under a false name with their daughter. Because now he was certain Sophia was their daughter. The timing was perfect. Isabel had disappeared in May 1997, and Sophia was born in March 1998, exactly 9 months later. Meanwhile, in Asheville, Elena Carter sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the newspaper article she'd found online about Lancaster Textiles' new community outreach initiatives. There was a photo of Sophia shaking hands with Thomas at some ribbon-cutting ceremony, both of them smiling, and Elena felt like she was looking at a glimpse of the life that had been stolen from her. Sophia looked so happy, so confident and successful, everything Elena had dreamed her daughter would become. But seeing her with Thomas, seeing how comfortable they looked together, filled Elena with a terror so profound she could barely breathe. What if Sophia discovered the truth? What if Thomas figured out who she was? Elena had built their entire life on the foundation of those devastating letters, the proof that Thomas Lancaster was a cruel man who would destroy anyone who got in his way. But looking at this photo, seeing the gentle way he was looking at Sophia, Elena felt the first crack in the wall of certainty she'd built around her heart. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Sophia's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, sweetheart," Elena managed, trying to sound normal. "Mom, I have to tell you something incredible." Sophia's voice was bubbling with excitement. "I found a photo today, in the company archives. There was this picture from a charity gala in 1996, and there was this woman who looked exactly like me. I mean, exactly. It was the strangest thing." Elena's blood turned to ice. A photo. Her name was Isabel Monroe. She was some kind of scholarship student at Columbia who used to attend these events, Mom. The resemblance was so uncanny that several people commented on it. Even Mr. Lancaster seemed really shaken when he saw me looking at it. Elena gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles went white. Someone had kept photos after all these years. Evidence of Isabel Monroe still existed. That's very strange. "Honey," Elena managed. "You know, sometimes people just have similar features. There's probably no connection." "Maybe," Sophia said, but Elena could hear the curiosity in her voice. "But, Mom, there's something else. Mr. Lancaster has been acting really weird around me. He keeps asking these personal questions about our family, about where I was born, about you. Yesterday he asked if I had any birthmarks, which was totally bizarre." Elena's hand flew instinctively to her own wrist, to the star-shaped birthmark that Sophia had inherited. The same birthmark Thomas used to trace with his finger when they lay together in the meadow behind campus. The same one he'd called his North Star, because it would always guide him back to her. "Birthmarks," Elena whispered. "I know, right? Super weird. I showed him the one on my wrist and he went completely pale. For a second I thought he was going to faint, then he just walked away without saying anything." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the walls of her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. Thomas knew, he had to know, or at least suspect, 27 years of hiding, and it was all falling apart because of a simple job interview. "Sophia," Elena said carefully, "I think you should come home. This job, this company, I have a bad feeling about it." "Mom, are you crazy?" This is the opportunity of a lifetime. The work is incredible. The pay is amazing. And I'm actually making a difference. Why would I come home? Because the man you're working for is your father, Elena thought desperately. Because I've built our entire life on a lie. And if you stay there much longer, you're going to discover that everything you've ever believed about yourself is false. I just miss you, Elena said instead. And I worry about you in that big city, around all those powerful people. I'm fine. Mom, better than fine, actually. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. After Sophia hung up, Elena sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, wrestling with 27 years of guilt and fear. She'd made her choice based on those letters, on Eleanor Lancaster's cruel words, on the absolute certainty that Thomas would never want her or their child. But what if she'd been wrong? What if the letters had been fake? The thought was too terrifying to contemplate. Because if Thomas hadn't written those letters, if he'd never called her a gold digger or threatened to make her disappear, then she'd stolen 27 years from all of them for nothing. Back in New York, Thomas stood in his office as the city lights twinkled to life below. Detective Harrison had promised to dig deeper, to find concrete proof that Elena Carter and Isabel Monroe were the same person. But Thomas didn't need proof anymore. His heart already knew the truth. Sophia was his daughter. Isabel was alive. And somehow, fate had brought them back into his life. The question that haunted him now was why Isabel had left in the first place. He'd replayed their last few weeks together 1,000 times, searching for clues he might have missed. They'd been so happy, so deeply in love. He'd been planning to propose after graduation, had already bought the ring. What had driven her away? What had convinced her to disappear so completely that she'd erased her own identity, as if summoned by his thoughts? Sophia appeared in his doorway, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "You're working late again," she observed. Stepping into his office, Martha went home hours ago. Thomas turned to face her, and once again felt that devastating punch of recognition. In the soft office lighting, with her hair slightly mussed from a long day of work, she looked so much like Isabel that it took his breath away. "I could say the same about you," he managed. Sophia shrugged. "I love what I do here. It doesn't feel like work when you're passionate about it." She paused, studying his face. "Can I ask you something personal, Mr. Lancaster?" Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs. "Of course. Do you have children?" The question hit him like a physical blow. "No," he said quietly. "No, I don't. Did you ever want them?" Thomas looked into her eyes, Isabel's eyes, and felt 27 years of grief and longing crash over him like a tidal wave. "More than anything," he whispered. Sophia nodded slowly, something shifting in her expression. "I always wondered what it would be like to have a father, someone who chose to be part of my life. You know, my mom did her best, but there was always this emptiness where that relationship should have been." Thomas had to grip the edge of his desk to keep from reaching for her, from pulling her into his arms and telling her that he'd never chosen to be absent from her life, that every day without her had been agony. "I'm sure your father had his reasons," Thomas said carefully. Sophia's laugh was bitter. "Oh, he had his reasons, all right. According to my mom, he was a selfish bastard who wanted nothing to do with us. She never said it directly, but I could read between the lines." Thomas felt something cold and sharp twist in his chest. Is that what Isabel had told their daughter? That he'd abandoned them by choice? "Sophia," he said softly, "sometimes people make decisions based on incomplete information. Sometimes the truth is more complicated than we know." She looked at him curiously. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." "Maybe I am." They stood there in the gathering darkness, father and daughter separated by 26 years of lies and misunderstandings, both of them sensing something profound hovering just beyond their understanding. "I should let you get home," Sophia said finally, as she turned to leave. Thomas called her name. "Sophia." "Yes, your mother. Does she ever talk about your father? About what happened between them?" Sophia's expression grew guarded. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious." It must have been difficult for her, raising you alone. It was. Sometimes I think she's still in love with him, even after all these years. She gets this look in her eyes, like she's seeing something beautiful and terrible at the same time. Sophia paused. "I used to hate him for what he did to her. But lately, I don't know. Maybe there's more to the story than I understand. After she left, Thomas remained standing at his window, watching her small figure disappear into the New York night. Tomorrow, Detective Harrison would call with more information. Tomorrow, he'd have to decide what to do with the truth that was slowly, inexorably revealing itself. But tonight, he allowed himself to imagine what might have been if Isabel had never left, if they'd raised Sophia together, if 27 years of loneliness had never happened at all. The quarterly board meeting was supposed to be routine. Financial reports, expansion plans, the usual corporate theater that Thomas had navigated effortlessly for decades. But as he sat at the head of the mahogany conference table, surrounded by 12 of the most powerful executives in the textile industry, his attention was completely consumed by Sophia's presence 3 seats down. She was presenting the Foundation's Community Impact Report, her voice confident and passionate as she detailed their success stories. Charts and graphs flashed on the wall-mounted screen, but Thomas found himself mesmerized by the graceful movements of her hands as she gestured, the way she paused to make eye contact with each board member, ensuring they understood the human cost behind every statistic. Our Teen Mother program has achieved an 87% high school graduation rate, Sophia was saying. Compared to the national average of 40%, these aren't just numbers. They represent lives transformed, futures reclaimed. Thomas watched the board members nodding approvingly, several taking notes. Sophia had them completely captivated, just as Isabel had once captivated him, with that same combination of intelligence and genuine compassion. Miss Carter, interrupted board member Harrison Webb, a silver-haired man who'd been skeptical of the Foundation's Bleeding Heart initiatives. These programs cost the company millions annually. How do we justify this expense to shareholders who expect profit, not charity? Sophia's smile never wavered, but Thomas caught the flash of steel in her eyes, the same look Isabel used to get when defending her scholarship program from wealthy classmates who thought she didn't belong. Mr. Webb, with respect, investing in communities isn't charity. It's smart business. Every teen mother who graduates high school and enters the workforce becomes a consumer, a taxpayer, a contributor to economic growth. Our cost-benefit analysis shows that every dollar invested in these programs generates $4 in long-term economic impact. She clicked to the next slide, revealing data that made Webb sit back in his chair. But more than that, these programs create brand loyalty that money can't buy. Lancaster Textiles isn't just another corporation. We're partners in community building. That reputation opens doors to contracts and markets that remain closed to our competitors. The room fell silent as the board absorbed her presentation. Thomas felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly took his breath away. This brilliant, passionate woman was his daughter, carrying forward the values he'd tried to instill in his company, but with an eloquence and fire that surpassed even his own. "Any other questions?" Sophia asked, gathering her materials. "Just one," said Thomas, speaking for the first time since the presentation began. "Could you walk us through the application process? I'd like to understand how beneficiaries qualify for support." Sophia brightened, clearly pleased by his interest. "Of course, each applicant fills out a comprehensive form detailing their circumstances, educational goals, and support needs. We also require documentation, birth certificates, medical records, proof of residency." She moved closer to the table, setting down a sample application form. "We're particularly careful about verification. Too many assistance programs fall victim to fraud, so we cross-reference everything." Thomas leaned forward to examine the form, and Sophia moved to point out specific sections. As she reached across the table, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing several inches of her left wrist. Time stopped. There, marking her pale skin like a celestial tattoo, was the star-shaped birthmark that had haunted Thomas's dreams for 27 years. 5 perfect points, each no bigger than a pencil eraser, arranged in a constellation that he'd memorized down to the smallest detail. His North Star, he'd called it when he traced it with trembling fingers in the meadow behind campus. Isabel had laughed and said it was just a birthmark, but Thomas had insisted it was proof that she was destined to guide him through life. The conference room seemed to tilt around him. Blood rushed in his ears so loudly he was certain everyone could hear it. His vision tunneled until all he could see was that perfect star, unchanged by time, marking his daughter's skin exactly as it had marked her mother's. "Mr. Lancaster," Sophia's voice sounded far away, concerned. "Are you all right?" Thomas tried to speak, but no words came. His hands were shaking so violently he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. The other board members were staring at him with growing alarm, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from Sophia's wrist. "Sir," Webb's voice cut through the fog. "Should we call a doctor?" Thomas finally managed to look up, meeting Sophia's worried green eyes. For a moment, he saw Isabel's face superimposed over hers, 18 years old, laughing in the sunlight as he kissed her birthmark and promised to love her forever. I need some air," Thomas managed, pushing back from the table so abruptly that his chair nearly toppled over. He fled the conference room, leaving behind a stunned silence and Sophia's increasingly alarmed calls for him to wait. He didn't stop until he reached his private bathroom, where he gripped the marble sink and stared at his reflection in the mirror. His face was chalk white, his eyes wild with a mixture of joy and terror that bordered on madness. 27 years of wondering, of hoping, of grieving, and now he had proof, undeniable, beautiful, devastating proof that Sophia Carter was his daughter. A knock on the bathroom door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Mr. Lancaster?" Sophia's voice was muffled but clearly worried. "Please let me help. Should I call someone?" Thomas splashed cold water on his face, trying to regain some semblance of composure. He couldn't let her see him like this, couldn't explain the significance of what he'd seen without revealing everything. "I'm fine," he called back, his voice hoarse. "Just needed a moment. You don't sound fine. You looked like you'd seen a ghost in there. If only she knew." Thomas thought bitterly. He had seen a ghost. The ghost of a love lost, a life stolen, a family that should have been. He opened the door to find Sophia standing in his office, her face creased with genuine concern. She'd dismissed the board meeting and sent everyone away, he realized. She'd chosen to stay and check on him instead of networking with some of the most powerful people in the industry. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for staying." Sophia studied his face with those impossibly familiar eyes. "What happened in there?" "One minute you were fine, and the next you looked like you were about to collapse." Thomas moved to his desk, needing the physical barrier between them. How could he explain that seeing her birthmark had confirmed his deepest suspicion and greatest hope? How could he tell her that she was looking at her father? "It's complicated," he said finally. "Try me." Thomas looked at her, really looked at her, the determined set of her jaw, the way she crossed her arms when she was prepared to dig in for answers, the unwavering directness of her gaze. All Isabel, but tempered with a strength that came from surviving 26 years without the father who should have been there to protect her. "Sophia," he said carefully, "what do you know about your birth?" "About the circumstances surrounding your arrival." Her expression grew guarded. "That's a strange question. Humor me." Sophia hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I was born in March 1998. My mother was 18, unmarried, and alone. She's never told me anything about my father, except that he was someone who hurt her very badly." "Did she ever mention where she was before you were born? Where she lived, what she was doing?" "She's always been vague about that time. Said she was finding herself after high school, whatever that means." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "Why are you asking these questions? What does any of this have to do with my presentation today?" Thomas knew he was walking a dangerous line, but he couldn't help himself. He had to know more. "That birthmark on your wrist," he said, watching her face carefully. "Have you always had it?" Sophia's hand flew instinctively to her wrist, covering the star-shaped mark. "Of course I've always had it. You're born with birthmarks, Mr. Lancaster. They don't just appear. It's very distinctive, star-shaped, unusual. I guess." Sophia was looking at him like he'd lost his mind, which wasn't far from the truth. "My mom has one exactly like it. She used to say we were marked by the same star, whatever that means." Thomas's heart stopped. Isabel still carried the mark. After all these years, she still bore the constellation he'd loved so much. "Mr. Lancaster," Sophia said slowly, "you're scaring me. What's going on? Why do you care about my birthmark?" Thomas realized he'd pushed too far, revealed too much of his desperate need for answers. Sophia was looking at him with suspicion now, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal the wariness of someone who'd learned early, that powerful men often had hidden agendas. "I'm sorry," he said, forcing himself to sit down, to appear calm and rational. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I've been under a lot of stress lately, and I'm afraid it's affecting my judgment." Sophia didn't look convinced, but she relaxed slightly. "Is there something going on with the company? Something I should know about?" "No, nothing like that. It's more personal. Want to talk about it?" The simple offer, spoken with such genuine kindness, nearly broke him. This was his daughter, offering comfort to the father she didn't know she had. The irony was almost too much to bear. "There was someone I loved once," Thomas found himself saying. "Someone I lost a long time ago. Sometimes I see reminders of her, and it affects me more than I'd like to admit." Sophia's expression softened with understanding. "She must have been very special. She was everything," Thomas whispered. They stood in silence for a moment, and Thomas felt the weight of 27 years of secrets pressing down on him. He wanted to tell her everything, about Isabel, about the love they'd shared, about the daughter he'd never known he'd had, but he couldn't. Not yet. Not until he understood why Isabel had left, why she'd kept Sophia's existence a secret. "I should let you get back to work," Sophia said finally. "But Mr. Lancaster, if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm a good listener. My mom always said I inherited that from someone." As she turned to leave, Thomas called her name. "Sophia." "Yes, that presentation today was exceptional. You have a gift for making people care about things they've never thought about before." Sophia smiled, and for a moment, Thomas saw pure joy light up her features. The same joy Isabel used to radiate when she talked about her dreams of changing the world. "Thank you," Sophia said. "That means more to me than you know." After she left, Thomas sat alone in his office as darkness fell over the city. He pulled out his phone and called Detective Harrison. "I need everything you can find on Elena Carter and Isabel Monroe," he said without preamble. "Everything. Medical records, school transcripts, any documentation that can prove they're the same person. And I need it fast." "How fast?" Thomas looked at the photo on his desk, the one of Isabel he'd kept hidden for 27 years. Tomorrow, he would have proof. Tomorrow, he would know for certain that fate had returned his family to him. Yesterday wouldn't be fast enough. Detective Harrison's call came at 6:47 a.m., jolting Thomas from the first peaceful sleep he'd managed in weeks. He'd dreamed of Isabel again, but this time she wasn't crying or running away. She was laughing, holding a baby with Sophia's green eyes and his own stubborn chin. "Mr. Lancaster." Harrison's voice was tight with excitement. "You need to hear this. I found the connection." Thomas sat up in bed, instantly alert. "Tell me." Elena Carter didn't exist before September 1997. I mean that literally. No birth certificate, no social security number, no school records, nothing. But Isabel Monroe, she disappeared from Columbia University in May 1997, right before finals. Her roommate said she left in the middle of the night without explanation. Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs. What else? Here's where it gets interesting. I accessed medical records from the campus health center. Isabel Monroe was 3 months pregnant when she disappeared. The timing matches perfectly with Sophia Carter's birth. The phone slipped from Thomas's suddenly nerveless fingers. 3 months pregnant. Isabel had been carrying his child when she vanished, and she'd never told him. 27 years of wondering why she'd left, and now he knew the truth was even more devastating than he'd imagined. "Sir, are you there?" Thomas fumbled for the phone. "Yes, keep going. I also found something else. Elena Carter's first apartment lease in Asheville was co-signed by a social worker named Margaret Wu. I tracked her down. She's retired now, but remembers Elena clearly. Said she was a frightened young woman who'd been betrayed by someone she trusted. Wu helped her get false documentation, a new identity. It was all legal. Witness protection type stuff for domestic violence cases. Domestic violence. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. Isabel had been so terrified of someone that she'd needed to erase her entire identity to escape. Did Wu say who Elena was running from? She wouldn't give specifics, but she mentioned it involved a powerful family, and that Elena had proof they'd threatened her. Wu said Elena was traumatized, kept talking about letters that proved this family would destroy her if she didn't disappear. Thomas felt the world tilt beneath him. Letters. What letters? He'd never written anything threatening to Isabel. He'd barely had time to process her disappearance before his mother had shipped him off to the European offices. To get his head straight, his mother, Eleanor Lancaster, had always despised Isabel, had made no secret of her belief that Thomas was slumming with a scholarship student. She'd called Isabel inappropriate and social climbing, but Thomas had dismissed it as Eleanor's usual snobbery. But what if it had been more than disapproval? What if Eleanor had actively intervened? "Harrison," Thomas said, his voice deadly quiet, "I need you to investigate my mother. Find out what she was doing in May 1997, who she had contact with, any financial transactions that might seem unusual. Your mother..." "Sir?" "Eleanor Lancaster and Harrison, discretion is paramount. If she discovers what you're investigating, it could destroy everything." After hanging up, Thomas stood at his bedroom window watching the sun rise over Manhattan. Somewhere out there, Isabel was living under a false name, believing he'd rejected her and their unborn child. Somewhere out there, his daughter was starting another day at work, completely unaware that her entire life had been built on a foundation of lies. Meanwhile, 300 miles south, Elena Carter sat in her small kitchen, staring at the email on her laptop screen. Sophia had sent it the night before, a brief update that had turned Elena's world upside down. "Mom, the strangest thing happened today, Mr. Lancaster asked me about my birthmark. You know, our matching star. He seemed really affected by it, almost like he recognized it. Have you ever met anyone with the Lancaster name? This is probably crazy, but I keep feeling like there's something you're not telling me about my father. Love you, Sa." Elena's hands shook as she reread the message for the 20th time. Thomas knew. He had to know, or at least suspect. After 27 years of hiding, her carefully constructed world was crumbling because she'd allowed Sophia to take a job with the one man who could recognize the truth. She pulled out the shoebox she kept hidden in her bedroom closet, the one that contained the only remnants of her life as Isabel Monroe. Among the few photographs and mementos were the letters. The cruel, devastating letters that had driven her away from the only man she'd ever loved. Elena spread them across her kitchen table, reading Thomas's supposed words for the first time in years. The handwriting was perfect, the letterhead authentic. But as she studied them with older, wiser eyes, she began to notice inconsistencies she'd missed at 18. The Thomas she'd known had never used words like gold-digging opportunist. He'd been gentle, kind, respectful. Even when they'd argued about small things, he'd never been cruel. And the phrase, "get rid of it." Thomas had always wanted children, had talked about their future family with such tenderness. But Eleanor Lancaster's voice echoed in her memory, cold and certain. "He never loved you. You were just a distraction, something to amuse himself with before he married someone appropriate." Elena had been 18, pregnant, and terrified, when faced with letters that seemed to prove her worst fears and a $50,000 check that Eleanor claimed was abortion money. She'd done the only thing that made sense. She'd run now, looking at the letters with 27 years of perspective. Elena felt the first stirrings of doubt. What if she'd been wrong? What if Eleanor had lied? Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Sophia's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, sweetheart," Elena managed, quickly gathering up the letters. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Sophia's voice was serious, more adult than Elena had ever heard it. "Mr. Lancaster has been acting strange around me, really strange. Yesterday he asked about my birthmark, my birth circumstances, where you lived before I was born. It's like he's looking for something specific." Elena's heart pounded so hard she was certain Sophia could hear it through the phone. "What kinds of questions?" "He wanted to know about my father. About what happened between you two, Mom. He looked at my birthmark like he'd seen it before, like he recognized it." The words Elena had dreaded for 27 years hung in the air between them. She could tell Sophia the truth, that Thomas Lancaster was her father, that Elena had run away based on letters that might have been forgeries, that their entire life had been built on a foundation of lies and fear, or she could protect the secret a little longer, keep her daughter safe from the devastating possibility that Elena had stolen 27 years from all of them for nothing. "Mom, are you there?" "I'm here," Elena whispered. "Sophia, I think you should quit that job. Come home. What? Why? This is the opportunity of a lifetime. Because... Elena struggled to find words that wouldn't reveal everything. Because some secrets are too dangerous to uncover. Because some powerful families destroy people who threaten them. Because I can't lose you too. Too, Mom. What are you talking about? Who else did you lose? Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 27 years of lies pressing down on her. Your father, she said quietly. I lost your father. I thought he left us. I thought he didn't want us. It's complicated, Sophia. More complicated than you can imagine. Then explain it to me. I'm 26 years old, Mom. I have a right to know the truth about my own life. Elena looked at the letters scattered across her table, at the faded photographs of a younger version of herself laughing in Thomas's arms, at the life she'd abandoned because a bitter old woman had convinced her it was never real to begin with. I can't, she whispered. Not over the phone. Not like this. Then I'm coming home. This weekend. And we're going to talk about everything. My father. Why you really left wherever you were before I was born. Why you've been so secretive about the past. All of it. After Sophia hung up, Elena sat in her kitchen as the morning light grew stronger. In 3 days, her daughter would be here, demanding answers. Elena wasn't sure she was brave enough to give. She picked up one of the letters, studying the handwriting that had once convinced her that the love of her life had betrayed her. But now, older and wiser, she could see what her 18-year-old self had missed. The writing was too perfect, too consistent. Real handwriting had variations, slight changes in pressure and spacing. This looked like someone had carefully copied Thomas's style, practicing until they could forge it flawlessly. Elena pulled out her laptop and did something she hadn't dared to do in 27 years. She searched for Thomas Lancaster online. The results were overwhelming. Hundreds of articles about his business success, his charitable work, his quiet personal life. But it was the older articles that caught her attention. Interviews from his early years as CEO where he talked about his regrets. One quote, from a business magazine interview in 2010, made her breath catch. My greatest regret is that I never got to tell someone very important to me how much she meant to me. She disappeared from my life, and I've spent every day since wondering what I could have done differently. Another, from a charity gala profile in 2015. I support programs for single mothers because I know how difficult it can be to raise a child alone. Every woman deserves support, deserves to know that someone cares about her struggle. These weren't the words of a man who had cruelly rejected a pregnant girlfriend. These were the words of someone who was haunted by loss, who had spent decades wondering about the one who got away. Elena stared at the screen, feeling 27 years of certainty crumble around her. What if the letters were fake? What if Eleanor Lancaster had manipulated them both? What if Thomas had spent the last 27 years mourning the loss of a woman and child he'd never known he'd had? Her phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Change my mind. I'm driving down tonight. We need to talk now. Elena looked at the letters one more time, then made a decision that terrified her. She was going to tell Sophia everything. About Isabel Monroe, about the letters, about the possibility that they'd both been living a lie for 27 years. But first, she had to find the courage to face the possibility that she'd destroyed 3 lives based on the lies of a bitter old woman who couldn't bear to see her son happy with someone she deemed unworthy. As she gathered up the letters and photographs, Elena whispered a prayer to whatever force had kept them safe for 27 years, asking for strength to face the truth, whatever it might be. In a few hours, Sophia would be here. In a few hours. Elena would have to choose between protecting the lie that had shaped their entire lives, or destroying it in favor of a truth that might be even more devastating. Either way, everything was about to change. Thomas's hands trembled as he read Detective Harrison's final report. The evidence was irrefutable. Bank records showing Eleanor Lancaster had paid a professional forger $50,000 in May 1997. The same week Isabel disappeared. Phone records revealed calls to a private investigator who specialized in reputation management for wealthy families. Most damning of all was a recorded conversation Harrison had obtained from the investigator's old files. Eleanor's voice, cold and calculating, discussing how to eliminate the Monroe problem permanently. The girl is a threat to my son's future. Eleanor's voice crackled through the decades-old recording. I don't care what it takes. Make her disappear. Thomas sat in his office as the sun set over Manhattan. the weight of 27 years of truth crushing down on him. His mother had destroyed 3 lives because she couldn't bear the thought of an unsuitable daughter-in-law. Isabel had fled in terror, carrying his child, believing he had rejected them both. Sophia had grown up without a father, shaped by the lie that he had abandoned them. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Emergency at home. Taking Friday off to drive to North Carolina. Something's wrong with my mom. Thomas stared at the message, his heart hammering. Elena was panicking. She knew he was getting close to the truth. This was his chance, perhaps his only chance to reach her before she ran again. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door. 27 years ago, he'd let Isabel slip away without a fight. This time would be different. Meanwhile, Sophia was already on I-95, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she pushed her rental car through the gathering darkness. Her mother's phone call that afternoon had been incoherent. Something about secrets and lies, and protecting you from the truth. Elena had been crying so hard Sophia could barely understand her. But one thing had come through clearly. Her mother was terrified. Sophia had never heard Elena sound like that, not even during her worst depressive episodes. This was different. This was the sound of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing. The 6-hour drive gave Sophia plenty of time to think about the strange coincidences that had been piling up since she'd started working for Lancaster Textiles. The way Thomas looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. His bizarre questions about her birthmark, her family history, her birth circumstances, the photo of Isabel Monroe that had so unsettled him, and underneath it all, a growing sense that her entire life had been built on foundations she didn't understand. In Asheville, Elena paced her small living room. The forged letters spread across her coffee table like evidence in a crime scene. She'd spent the day researching Eleanor Lancaster, finding obituaries and society pages that painted a picture of a woman consumed by social status and family legacy, a woman who would do anything to protect what she saw as her family's interests. At 79, Eleanor Lancaster lived in a Fifth Avenue penthouse, alone except for her guilt and regret. Elena had found recent interviews where the elderly woman spoke about mistakes made in the name of love and protecting people who didn't need protection. The words of someone wrestling with a lifetime of secrets. Elena's phone rang, jarring her from her thoughts. An unknown number with a New York area code. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Elena, this is Thomas Lancaster." The voice she hadn't heard in 27 years hit her like a physical blow, still deep and warm, but roughened by decades of loneliness and regret. Elena sank onto her couch. The phone pressed against her ear as her world tilted. "I know who you are," Thomas continued, his voice gentle but urgent. "I know about Sophia. I know what my mother did to us." Elena couldn't speak. After 27 years of wondering, of hoping, of fearing this exact moment, she found herself speechless. "Elena, please, talk to me. Let me explain." "Explain what?" she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Explain the letters. Explain how you called me a gold digger. Explain how you wanted me to get rid of our baby. I never wrote those letters." Thomas's voice was thick with pain. "I never said any of those things, Elena. I loved you. I've loved you every day for 27 years. I was going to propose after graduation." Elena's breath caught. "What? I had the ring. I was waiting for the right moment. Then you disappeared and I thought you'd decided you didn't want that life with me. I've been searching for you ever since." Elena looked at the letters scattered on her table, seeing them with new eyes, forgeries, all of them. 27 years of believing the worst about the only man she'd ever loved, and it had all been lies. "Your mother," she whispered. "She told me you knew about the pregnancy. She said you were disgusted, that you wanted nothing to do with us. She knew about the baby." Thomas's voice cracked. "Elena, I never knew. I swear to you. I never knew you were pregnant if I had. You would have what? Married me out of obligation. I would have married you because I was already planning to. The pregnancy would have just made me happier." Thomas paused, and Elena could hear him struggling with emotion. "We have a daughter, Elena. A beautiful, brilliant daughter who doesn't know I exist." Elena closed her eyes, 27 years of grief and longing crushing down on her. "I know, she works for you. I suspected, but I wasn't sure until I saw her birthmark. our star." Thomas's voice grew tender. "She has your laugh, your passion for helping people, and she has questions, Elena. She's starting to figure out that there's more to the story. She's driving here tonight. She wants answers. Then we need to give them to her. Together." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Thomas, I can't. I've built our entire life on the lie that you didn't want us. If Sophia learns the truth, she deserves the truth. We all do." Thomas's voice was firm now, determined. "Elena, I'm coming to Asheville. Tonight, we're going to face this together, the way we should have 27 years ago." Before Elena could respond, headlights swept across her living room window. Sophia's car was pulling into the driveway. "She's here," Elena whispered. "I'm 3 hours away. Don't let her leave, Elena, please. Keep her there until I can explain everything." Elena hung up as Sophia's key turned in the front door. Her daughter appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted and worried, her hair disheveled from the long drive. "Mom." Sophia's voice was tentative, scared. "What's going on? You sounded terrified on the phone." Elena looked at her daughter, Thomas's daughter, and felt 27 years of secrets pressing against her chest like a physical weight. Sophia had his eyes, she realized suddenly. Not just the color, but the shape, the way they crinkled slightly when she was concerned. How had she never noticed? "Sit down, sweetheart," Elena said softly. "We need to talk." Sophia settled onto the couch, her gaze falling on the letters spread across the coffee table. "What are these?" "Letters I received 27 years ago. Letters I thought were from your father." Elena's voice shook. "Letters that made me believe he didn't want us." Sophia picked up one of the letters, studying the handwriting. "These are about me, about when I was born, about when you were conceived, about how much I loved your father, and how completely I believed he had rejected us both." Sophia's face went pale as she read the cruel words, the threats, the dismissive language. "Dad wrote these. I thought he did, but now..." Elena looked at her daughter, seeing Thomas's stubborn chin, his determined expression when he was working through a problem. "Now I think we were both victims of someone who couldn't bear to see us together." "Mom, you're scaring me. What aren't you telling me?" Elena reached across the table and took Sophia's hands in hers. They were shaking, both of them trembling with the weight of what was about to be revealed. "Your father's name is Thomas Lancaster." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia stared at her mother, processing the impossible words. "Thomas Lancaster," Sophia repeated slowly. "My boss. The man I've been working for. Yes, the man who's been asking strange questions about my birthmark, my family history, my birth. Yes." Sophia stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "That's why he looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. That's why he seemed so familiar, Mom. How long have you known?" "I suspected when you told me the company name. I knew for certain when you mentioned his questions about the birthmark." Elena's voice was barely audible. "He called me 20 minutes ago. He's driving here tonight." Sophia spun around, her face a mixture of shock and growing anger. "He's coming here now." "Sophia, he didn't know. He never knew about the pregnancy, never wrote those letters. We were both deceived." "By who?" Elena looked at the research she'd printed about Eleanor Lancaster. The society pages and obituaries that told the story of a woman consumed by protecting her family's legacy. By his mother, by a woman who thought I wasn't good enough for her son and was willing to destroy 3 lives to prove it. Sophia sank back onto the couch, her head in her hands. "This is insane. You're telling me that my entire life, everything I believed about myself, about why I don't have a father, it's all been a lie. I'm so sorry," Elena whispered. "I was 18 and terrified and pregnant. When his mother showed me those letters, when she told me he wanted nothing to do with us. You ran. I ran, and I've been running ever since." Sophia looked up, tears streaming down her face. "He doesn't know, does he? That I'm his daughter? He suspects, but he's never been certain until recently. And now he's coming here." "Yes." Sophia stood up again, this time with purpose. "Then we're going to wait for him, all 3 of us, and we're going to figure out how to put back together what his mother tore apart 27 years ago." Elena felt a spark of hope for the first time in decades. Her daughter, their daughter, was ready to fight for the family that had been stolen from them. Outside, Thomas's car was racing through the Virginia countryside, carrying him toward the reunion he'd dreamed of for 27 years. Behind him in New York, Eleanor Lancaster sat alone in her penthouse, finally understanding that the consequences of her actions were about to come home. The three people whose lives she'd shattered were about to find each other again. And this time, nothing would keep them apart. At 11:47 p.m., Thomas's headlights swept across the modest duplex where Elena had built their new life. His hands shook as he turned off the engine. 27 years of longing and heartbreak culminating in this single moment. Through the living room window, he could see two silhouettes. One he'd recognize anywhere, even after decades of separation, and another that belonged to the daughter he'd never known he had. Inside, Elena paced nervously while Sophia sat frozen on the couch, still processing the earth-shattering revelation that her entire identity had been built on lies. The forged letters lay scattered between them like evidence of a crime that had stolen 27 years from 3 lives. "Mom, I can't do this," Sophia said suddenly, her voice tight with panic. "I can't just sit here and wait for him to walk through that door. This is insane. Sophia, please." "No." Sophia shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking. "You don't understand what this means. I've been working for my father for weeks. I've been having conversations with him, presenting to him, wondering why he seemed so familiar. And all this time, he's been looking at me and seeing, what? His lost love, his secret daughter." Elena's heart broke, watching her daughter struggle with the magnitude of the deception. "Sweetheart, he didn't know. None of us knew for certain until..." A car door slammed outside. Cutting her off, both women froze, listening to footsteps on the front walkway. 27 years of separation were about to end with a simple knock on the door. But Thomas didn't knock. He stood on the small porch, gathering courage he wasn't sure he possessed. Through the window, he could see Elena clearly for the first time since 1997. She was still beautiful, though sorrow had left its mark in the lines around her eyes. And Sophia, God, Sophia looked so much like Isabel at 18. It took his breath away. Elena noticed him first, their eyes meeting through the glass. For a moment, time collapsed, and they were 21 and 18 again, young and in love and planning a future that seemed guaranteed. Then reality crashed back, bringing with it the weight of everything they'd lost. Sophia followed her mother's gaze and saw him standing there, the man she'd known as her demanding but caring boss, now revealed as the father whose absence had shaped her entire life. Even in the dim porch light, she could see her own features reflected in his face. The same stubborn chin, the same intense green eyes, the same way of standing with shoulders slightly hunched when uncertain. "I can't," Sophia whispered, backing away from the window. "I can't face him. Not yet." But it was too late. Thomas had seen her reaction, had watched her retreat, and the devastation on his face was visible even through the glass. He'd spent 27 years wondering about his lost love, only to discover that love had borne him a daughter who couldn't bear to look at him. Elena made the decision for all of them. She walked to the front door and opened it, her heart hammering as she faced the man she'd never stopped loving. "Hello, Thomas." "Elena." His voice was hoarse with emotion. You're even more beautiful than I remembered." They stared at each other across the threshold. 27 years of separation stretching between them like a chasm. Elena wanted to throw herself into his arms, to sob out all the loneliness and regret and love she'd carried for so long. But she could feel Sophia's distress radiating from the living room, and she knew this reunion was about more than just the two of them. "She's scared," Elena said quietly. "This is overwhelming for her, for all of us." Thomas's eyes searched her face. "Elena, I need you to know, I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped hoping I'd find you someday. I know. I researched you today, read some of your interviews, the things you said about regret, about lost love." Elena's voice broke. "Thomas, I'm so sorry. I should have known those letters weren't real. I should have trusted what we had. You were 18 and pregnant and scared. My mother can be very convincing when she wants to destroy someone." Thomas's jaw tightened. "This isn't your fault, Elena. It's hers." From the living room came the sound of Sophia pacing, her footsteps quick and agitated. Thomas looked past Elena, desperate for another glimpse of his daughter. Can I see her?" Talk to her. Elena hesitated. She's not ready. This has all happened so fast, and she's trying to process. I'm right here. Sophia's voice cut through their whispered conversation. She appeared in the doorway behind Elena, her face pale but determined. I can speak for myself. Thomas's breath caught as he got his first clear look at Sophia up close. Knowing who she was, it was like seeing Isabel and himself combined into one perfect person. Their daughter, the child they'd made in love, who'd grown up believing she was unwanted. Sophia, he said softly, I don't know where to begin. How about with why you never tried to find us? Sophia's voice was steady, but Thomas could hear the pain underneath. If you loved my mother so much, if you were planning to propose, why didn't you search for her when she disappeared? Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sophia suddenly recognized. She did the same thing when frustrated. I did search, for years, but Isabel Monroe had vanished completely. There were no credit cards, no bank accounts, no employment records. It was like she'd never existed. Because she became Elena Carter, Sophia said, understanding dawning in her voice. Because my mother forced her to become Elena Carter. Thomas's voice hardened. I have proof now. Bank records, phone calls, recordings. Eleanor paid to have those letters forged. She hired people to make sure you disappeared completely. Sophia stared at him, processing this information. Your mother destroyed our family because she didn't think my mom was good enough for you. Yes, and you never suspected. Never wondered if she might have interfered. Thomas's face crumpled with anguish. I was 21 and devastated. My mother told me that sometimes young women get overwhelmed and run away, that Isabel would come back when she was ready. I believed her because I needed to believe her. Because thinking that you had both chosen to leave me was unbearable. The three of them stood frozen in the doorway. 27 years of pain and misunderstanding hanging in the air between them. Elena could see Sophia wavering, her anger battling with a lifetime of wondering about her father. Sophia, Thomas said quietly, I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I wasn't there when you were growing up. Wasn't there for first steps or scraped knees or bedtime stories. But that wasn't my choice. If I had known. If you had known what? Sophia's voice cracked. That you had a daughter. Would you have wanted me? Wanted you? Thomas's voice broke completely. Sophia, you're the most incredible person I've ever met. You're brilliant and passionate and kind, and I've been so proud of you these past few weeks without even knowing why. If I had known you were my daughter, I would have moved heaven and earth to be part of your life. Sophia's composure finally shattered. Tears streamed down her face as 26 years of wondering about her father crashed into the reality of him standing in front of her, looking at her with such raw love and regret that it took her breath away. I used to dream about you, she whispered. When I was little, I used to imagine that you were a good man who had been kept away from us somehow. Mom always said you didn't want us, but I dreamed you did. Thomas took a step forward, his own tears falling freely. I did want you. I want you now. Both of you. Elena watched her daughter and the man she'd never stopped loving reach tentatively toward each other across 27 years of separation. But before they could bridge that final gap, Sophia's phone rang, the harsh sound shattering the delicate moment. She glanced at the screen, frowning. It's a New York number I don't recognize. Answer it, Thomas said, his voice tight with sudden dread. I think I know who it is. Sophia accepted the call, putting it on speaker. An elderly woman's voice filled the small entryway, refined and imperious despite the obvious frailty of age. Miss Carter, this is Eleanor Lancaster. I believe you're currently speaking with my son. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thomas's face went white with fury while Elena stepped protectively closer to Sophia. How did you get this number? Sophia demanded. I have my resources, dear. I'm calling because I need to speak with all three of you. It's time we addressed the situation I created 27 years ago. Elena found her voice first. 27 years of pain and anger erupting. You destroyed our lives. You stole my daughter's father from her and made me believe the man I loved had rejected us. Yes, Eleanor said simply. I did. And now I'm calling to face the consequences of my actions. I'm flying to North Carolina tonight. We need to have a conversation that's 27 years overdue. The line went dead, leaving the three of them staring at each other in stunned silence. The woman who had torn their family apart was coming to face them, bringing with her the answers they'd all been seeking. Thomas reached for Elena's hand, and she didn't pull away. For the first time in 27 years, they stood united against the force that had destroyed their happiness. "Whatever she has to say," Thomas said quietly. "We face it together, all of us." Sophia looked at her parents, and for the first time in her life, she truly had parents, and nodded. The reckoning they'd all been waiting for was finally at hand. Eleanor Lancaster arrived at 3:17 a.m. in a private car that looked absurdly out of place on Elena's modest street. At 79, she moved slowly, but with the regal bearing that had intimidated countless people over the decades. Her driver helped her up the walkway, wheeling a small oxygen tank that spoke to her failing health. Thomas opened the door before she could knock, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Mother." "Thomas." Eleanor's voice was weaker than it had been on the phone, but her eyes were still sharp. "You look tired. 27 years of wondering will do that to a person." Eleanor nodded to her driver, who retreated to the car. Then she looked past Thomas to where Elena and Sophia stood in the living room, both women staring at her with a mixture of fear and anger. "Miss Monroe," Eleanor said, using Elena's real name deliberately, "you're still quite beautiful." And Sophia, her gaze settled on her granddaughter, with something that might have been regret. "You have your father's eyes." "Don't," Sophia said sharply. "Don't you dare try to play the loving grandmother now." Eleanor moved into the living room with slow, measured steps. The oxygen tank made a soft hissing sound that was the only noise in the otherwise silent house. "You're right to be angry," Eleanor said, settling carefully into Elena's armchair. "All of you, I came here to explain myself, though I suspect nothing I say will justify what I did." Thomas remained standing by the door, as if ready to bolt or block his mother's escape. "Then why did you do it? Why destroy 3 lives because you didn't approve of my girlfriend?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her fingers working the handle of her oxygen tank when she finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I was terrified." "Terrified?" Elena stepped forward, her composure slipping. "Of what? Of me, I was 18 years old. Not of you personally," Eleanor said. "Of what you represented. Of losing my son to someone I thought would take him away from the family. From the business. From everything we'd built." Thomas laughed bitterly. "So instead, you took away the only things that ever mattered to me." Eleanor flinched as if he'd struck her. "Your grandfather died when your father was very young. I raised Thomas alone. Built Lancaster Textiles from nothing. When you started dating Elena, you began talking about marriage, about a simple life, about walking away from the business to be a teacher or social worker. I panicked." Sophia found her voice, her anger finally overriding her shock. "So you destroyed my mother's life, made her believe my father didn't want us. I hired a private investigator to look into Elena's background," Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger as she confessed. "He discovered the pregnancy before either of you knew Elena was going to tell you." "Thomas, that's when I knew I had to act." Elena sank onto the couch, the full scope of Eleanor's manipulation finally becoming clear. "You knew I was pregnant before I could tell him." "Yes, and I knew that if Thomas found out, he'd marry you immediately. He'd give up everything for love." Eleanor's voice carried a note of grudging admiration. "He was always too good, too pure, just like his father." Thomas moved closer to Elena and Sophia, positioning himself between them and his mother. "So you had the letters forged?" "I found a man who specialized in document creation for wealthy families dealing with scandals. He studied samples of your handwriting for weeks until he could replicate it perfectly." Eleanor reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out a manila envelope. "I brought them with me. The originals." Elena's hands trembled as she took the envelope, pulling out letters that had haunted her for 27 years. But these weren't the ones she'd been shown. These were different, crueler, more devastating. "These aren't the same," Elena whispered, scanning the brutal words. "The ones you showed me were horrible, but these—" "I had him write multiple versions," Eleanor said. "I showed you the mildest ones first, to see if they would be enough to make you leave, when you seemed to waver, when you said you wanted to talk to Thomas first. I brought out the worst ones," Sophia read over Elena's shoulder, her face going white at the vicious language. Words like pathetic and worthless and mistake jumped off the page, but it was the final letter that broke her heart completely. Isabel, I've spoken with my mother about the situation, and we agree that you and the bastard you're carrying need to disappear permanently. I have friends in very dark places who can make that happen. Take the money and run, or face consequences you can't imagine. This is your only warning. You threatened to have us killed, Elena said, her voice hollow with shock. I wanted you gone, Eleanor said simply. I thought if you were scared enough, desperate enough, you'd take the money and disappear forever. Thomas looked at his mother with an expression of complete revulsion. You made Elena believe I wanted to murder her and our unborn child. I made her believe you would protect your family's interests at any cost. I thought that would be enough to keep her away. Sophia stood up abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. You're talking about this like it was business strategy. Like we were problems to be solved instead of people whose lives you destroyed. Eleanor met her granddaughter's furious gaze without flinching. You're right. That's exactly how I saw it. I was so focused on protecting what I thought mattered that I lost sight of what actually did. And what's that? Thomas demanded. That you were happy, Eleanor said, her voice breaking for the first time. That for the first time since your father died, you were truly, completely happy, and I destroyed that because I was too frightened and selfish to let you go. The room fell silent, except for the soft hiss of Eleanor's oxygen. Elena stared at the forged letters. 27 years of pain and confusion finally making sense. Sophia struggled to process that her entire life had been shaped by one woman's fear and prejudice. Thomas looked at his mother and saw a stranger, someone capable of cruelty he'd never imagined. There's more, Eleanor said quietly. Things you need to know about what happened after. Thomas felt his stomach clench with dread. What else? I had you followed when you went to Europe. You started drinking heavily, barely eating, calling out Elena's name in your sleep. I was so worried you'd hurt yourself that I had the investigator keep searching for her, thinking that if I could find her, convince her to at least call you. But you couldn't find her, Elena said, because I'd become someone else. We tracked you to Asheville, but Elena Carter had no connection to Isabel Monroe. The social worker who helped you had sealed the records. It was like you'd been erased. Eleanor's voice grew smaller. I realized I'd succeeded too well. I'd made you disappear so completely that even I couldn't bring you back. Sophia stood up and walked to the window, her back to the room. So you just let us stay lost for 27 years. You let my father suffer and my mother live in fear, and you never tried to fix what you'd broken. I tried, Eleanor said desperately. I hired private investigators for years. I donated millions to programs for single mothers, hoping somehow it would help you. I created scholarships for girls from broken homes, thinking maybe one day Sophia would apply and I'd find you that way. Thomas's laugh was bitter and harsh. Guilt money. You think your charitable donations make up for stealing my family? No, Eleanor said simply. Nothing makes up for what I did. I know that now. Elena turned the forged letters over in her hands, studying the handwriting that had convinced her to flee the only man she'd ever loved. Why now? Why tell us the truth after all these years? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Her breathing labored. Because I'm dying. Cancer. The doctors say I have maybe 3 months. The announcement hit the room like a physical blow. Thomas's anger faltered, replaced by something more complicated. I've spent 27 years living with what I did, Eleanor continued. Watching you turn into a shell of yourself, Thomas. Never marrying, never having children. Building an empire that meant nothing because you had no one to share it with. I did that to you. Sophia turned from the window, tears streaming down her face. You did it to all of us. I grew up thinking my father didn't want me. Do you have any idea what that does to a child? Yes, Eleanor whispered. I do now, and I'll carry that knowledge to my grave. Thomas moved to Elena's side, taking her hand for the first time in 27 years. We can't get back the time you stole from us. We can't undo the pain you caused. I know, but we're together now. Despite everything you did, despite all your manipulation and lies, we found each other again. Thomas's voice grew stronger. You failed, Mother. You didn't destroy what we had. You just delayed it. Eleanor nodded, tears flowing freely now. I know. and I'm grateful for that, even though I don't deserve gratitude." Sophia looked at the 3 adults who had shaped her life. The father she'd never known she had, the mother who'd sacrificed everything to protect her, and the grandmother whose actions had set everything in motion. "I need some air," she said suddenly, heading for the door. "Sophia, wait." Elena started after her. "Let her go," Thomas said gently. "She needs time to process this. We all do." As Sophia disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, Elena looked at the man she'd never stopped loving and the woman who had torn them apart. 27 years of secrets had finally been revealed, but the healing, if it was even possible, would take much longer. The hardest part, Elena realized, wasn't forgiving Eleanor Lancaster for what she'd done. It was figuring out how to forgive herself for believing the lies. Sophia didn't return for 3 days. She'd driven to the Blue Ridge Mountains, checking into a small cabin rental where she could think without the weight of 27 years of revelations crushing down on her. She'd turned off her phone, ignored the dozens of calls from Elena and Thomas, and spent the time walking mountain trails and trying to piece together who she was, now that everything she'd believed about herself had been shattered back in Asheville. Thomas and Elena existed in a strange limbo. He'd moved into a hotel but spent most of his time at Elena's house, the two of them talking through 27 years of separation, filling in the gaps that Eleanor's manipulation had created. They were careful with each other, tentative. Too much had been lost to simply pick up where they'd left off, but the foundation of their love remained solid beneath the debris of decades. "She gets that stubborn streak from you," Elena said on the 3rd morning, staring at her silent phone. "When she makes up her mind about something, there's no changing it." Thomas smiled despite his worry. "I seem to remember someone else who had that trait, like when you decided to major in social work instead of business. Even though everyone said you'd never make any money, I wanted to help people. Money wasn't the point. It's one of the things I loved about you, still love about you." The words slipped out before Thomas could stop them, hanging in the air between them. Elena looked at him, seeing the 21-year-old boy she'd fallen in love with still visible in the 53-year-old man he'd become. "Thomas, I know it's complicated. I know we can't just pretend the last 27 years didn't happen. But Elena, what I felt for you, what I feel for you, that never changed." Before Elena could respond, they heard a car in the driveway. Sophia's rental car pulled up, and she sat behind the wheel for several minutes before finally getting out. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes red from crying and lack of sleep. Thomas started to stand, but Elena caught his arm. "Let her come to us. She needs to feel in control right now." Sophia walked slowly to the front door, pausing on the threshold. Through the window, she could see her parents sitting together on the couch, and for the first time in her life, she could think of them that way without pain. Her parents, together, the way they should have been all along. She opened the door and stepped inside, noting how Thomas and Elena both turned toward her with identical expressions of relief and worry. "Hi," Sophia said quietly. "Hi yourself," Elena replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Are you okay?" Sophia settled into the armchair across from them, the same chair Eleanor had occupied 3 nights earlier. "I've been thinking about everything she said, about the letters, the manipulation, the fear that drove her to destroy our family." Thomas leaned forward. "Sophia, whatever you're feeling about this, about me, about the situation, it's okay. You don't owe me anything just because we share DNA, don't I?" Sophia's voice was thoughtful rather than angry. "For 26 years, I wondered about you. I created this fantasy father in my head. Sometimes he was a villain who abandoned us. Sometimes he was a hero who'd been kept away by circumstances beyond his control. Turns out, the hero version was closer to the truth." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I should have known those letters weren't real. I should have trusted what your father and I had. You were 18 and scared and pregnant." Eleanor Lancaster was a 79-year-old woman with unlimited resources and decades of experience manipulating people. Sophia's voice grew stronger. "She played on your worst fears and made them seem real. That's not your fault." Thomas felt something ease in his chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I spent 3 days being angry. At Eleanor, at the situation, at the 27 years we lost. But I realized something while I was up in those mountains." Sophia looked directly at Thomas. I can't change the past. None of us can, but I can choose what happens next. And what do you choose? Thomas asked, his voice barely audible. Sophia stood up and walked to where Thomas sat beside Elena. For a moment, she just looked at him, studying his face, seeing her own features reflected back at her. I choose to get to know my father, she said simply. If you want that too. Thomas's composure finally cracked. 27 years of grief and longing crashed over him as he pulled Sophia into his arms, holding his daughter for the first time since she was a cluster of cells in Isabel's womb. I've wanted that every day since I realized who you were, he whispered against her hair. Every single day. They held each other while Elena watched, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. This was what Eleanor's fear had cost them. 26 years of moments like this, of family dinners and bedtime stories, and all the small intimacies that built relationships between parents and children. When they finally separated, Sophia wiped her eyes and looked at both her parents. So what happens now? Do we just try to be a family? After all this time, we try, Elena said softly. We take it one day at a time and we figure it out as we go. Thomas nodded. I don't expect to step into a father role overnight. You're a grown woman with your own life, but I'd like to be part of it. If you'll let me, I'd like that too. Sophia paused, then asked the question that had been haunting her for 3 days. What about Eleanor? What happens to her? Thomas's expression hardened. She's dying. In a few months, she'll face whatever judgment awaits people who destroy families for sport. Thomas, Elena said gently, she's still your mother. She stopped being my mother the day she made you believe I wanted you dead. Sophia looked between her parents, seeing the tension this created. Can I ask you something, both of you? They nodded. Do you still love each other? The question hung in the air. Deceptively simple but loaded with 27 years of complexity. Thomas and Elena looked at each other, and Sophia saw something pass between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had never really died despite decades of separation. Yes, Thomas said quietly. I never stopped loving your mother. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Neither did I. Sophia felt a surge of something she'd never experienced before. Hope for a complete family, for parents who loved each other as much as they loved her. Then maybe, she said carefully, maybe Eleanor didn't win after all. Maybe what you two had was strong enough to survive even her manipulation. Thomas reached for Elena's hand, and this time she didn't hesitate to take it. Maybe it was. Elena looked at their joined hands, then at Sophia, then at Thomas. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared to hope for this. Scared to believe we can really have what was taken from us. We're all scared, Thomas said. But I'd rather be scared together than safe and alone. Sophia watched her parents navigate this tentative reunion and felt something settle in her chest, a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. She had a father who wanted to know her, a mother who'd sacrificed everything to protect her, and the possibility of a family that could heal from even the deepest wounds. There's something else, Sophia said. Eleanor mentioned she's been funding programs for single mothers and scholarships for girls from broken homes. What if we took that over? What if we turned her guilt money into something that actually helps families stay together instead of tearing them apart? Thomas looked at his daughter with growing amazement, even after learning about the manipulation that had shaped her entire life. She was thinking about how to help others in similar situations. The Lancaster Foundation already does some of that work, he said. But we could expand it, make it our focus. A program to help young couples facing unplanned pregnancies, Elena added, understanding immediately. Support them instead of driving them apart. Exactly, Sophia said. We can't get back our 27 years, but maybe we can prevent other families from losing theirs. Thomas felt pride swell in his chest, not just at Sophia's wisdom and compassion, but at the realization that she was choosing to build something positive from the wreckage of Eleanor's actions. We'll do it together, he said. All three of us. As the sun set over Asheville, the Lancaster family sat together for the first time in 27 years, planning a future that honored their past while refusing to be defined by it. Outside, the world continued its relentless motion, but inside Elena's small living room, time finally felt like it was moving in the right direction. Eleanor Lancaster had tried to destroy their love, but in the end, She'd only delayed its inevitable triumph. Some bonds, they'd learned, were too strong to break permanently. They just took 27 years to prove it. 6 months later, the morning sun filtered through the windows of the new Lancaster Family Foundation offices in downtown Asheville, illuminating the framed photographs that lined Sophia's desk. There was one of her parents on their wedding day, a simple ceremony in the same meadow where Thomas had once traced Isabel's star-shaped birthmark and promised to love her forever. Another showed all three of them at the foundation's launch, cutting the ribbon on their first family support center. But the photo that drew the most attention from visitors was the one taken just 3 weeks ago. Thomas, Elena, and Sophia, standing beside a newly planted oak tree in the memorial garden behind their main office building. The plaque beneath it read simply, "In memory of Eleanor Lancaster, may we learn from the past to build a better future." Eleanor had passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in February, alone in her Fifth Avenue penthouse despite Thomas's repeated offers to bring her to North Carolina. Her final weeks had been spent creating a comprehensive confession, recorded testimonies, documentation of her actions, and a trust fund worth $50 million, designated specifically for family reunification programs. She died as she lived, Thomas had said at the small funeral service, making decisions for other people without asking what they actually wanted. But Sophia had insisted they honor Eleanor's memory, not the woman who had torn their family apart, but the grandmother who had tried, in her final months, to undo some of the damage she'd caused. Now, as Sophia reviewed applications for their latest program, emergency support for young couples facing unplanned pregnancies, she marveled at how much had changed in just 6 months. Her relationship with Thomas had developed slowly, carefully. They'd started with weekly coffee meetings, talking about everything from business strategy to childhood memories he'd missed. Gradually, those meetings had expanded to include dinners, foundation work, and long walks, where Thomas shared stories about his own father, and Sophia told him about growing up believing he didn't want her. The moments when their father-daughter bond truly solidified had come unexpectedly, like the night Sophia had called him at 2 a.m., sobbing after a nightmare about Eleanor's threats, and Thomas had driven straight from New York to hold her until she could sleep again, or the afternoon when Sophia had mentioned wanting to learn piano, and Thomas had quietly arranged for the baby grand in his Manhattan apartment to be moved to her house in Asheville. "You kept it all these years?" Sophia had asked, running her fingers over the keys. "Your mother used to play," Thomas had said softly. "I could never bring myself to get rid of it." Elena and Thomas's reunion had been even more complex, layered with 27 years of grief and growth that couldn't be easily navigated. They'd started as co-parents working together for Sophia's sake. But the love that had survived decades of separation proved stronger than their careful boundaries. Their first kiss had happened on a snowy evening in December, while decorating the foundation's Christmas tree. Sophia had gone home early with a headache, leaving her parents alone with boxes of ornaments and the weight of everything they'd lost and found again. "I kept this," Elena had said quietly, unwrapping a delicate star ornament, "from our first Christmas together. I know it was stupid, but..." Thomas had taken the ornament from her hands, their fingers brushing as he hung it on the highest branch. "I kept our song," he'd admitted. "I haven't been able to listen to The Way You Look Tonight without crying for 27 years. The kiss that followed had been tentative, frightened, beautiful. Two people who'd never stopped loving each other finally brave enough to try again. They'd married on Valentine's Day in a ceremony that was equal parts celebration and healing ritual. Sophia had walked Elena down the aisle, tears streaming down her face as she watched her parents finally get the happy ending that had been stolen from them so long ago. "Do you think she's watching?" Elena had whispered before the ceremony, referring to Eleanor. "I hope so," Sophia had replied. "I hope she can see that love really does win in the end." Now, as Sophia worked in the office that bore her family's name, she felt the deep satisfaction of knowing they were preventing other families from suffering as theirs had. In just 6 months, the foundation had helped reunite 43 families torn apart by misunderstandings, provided counseling for 67 couples facing crisis pregnancies, and created a network of support services that stretched across 3 states. Knock, knock. Thomas appeared in her doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and wearing the relaxed smile he'd rediscovered since moving to North Carolina. "Your mother sent these. She says you've been working too hard again." Sophia accepted the coffee gratefully. At 27, she'd grown into her role as foundation director with natural grace, but she still had her mother's tendency to overwork when she was passionate about something. The Peterson case came through, she told him, gesturing to the file on her desk. Remember the couple from Charlotte, 17 and 16. Her parents wanted to force an adoption. His family was threatening to cut him off. Thomas sat down across from her, genuinely interested. This was what he'd missed most during their years apart, being able to share in Sophia's accomplishments, to feel proud of the incredible woman she'd become. What happened? We got them into counseling, helped mediate with both families, arranged for them to finish high school through our education program. They're keeping the baby, and both sets of grandparents are on board now. Sophia's smile lit up her face. Their daughter will grow up knowing both her parents wanted her. Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. That's what we should have had. What you should have had. But it's what their daughter will have, Sophia said gently. And that's what matters now. Elena appeared in the doorway, her hair streaked with paint from the children's art therapy session she'd been running. At 46, she'd found her calling working directly with the families they served, using her own experience to help other women facing impossible choices. How did the board meeting go? She asked, settling into the chair next to Thomas, with the easy familiarity of a couple who'd learned to cherish every ordinary moment together. They approved the expansion, Thomas said, his voice filled with satisfaction. 5 new centers over the next 2 years, plus the mobile crisis intervention unit Sophia designed. Elena reached for his hand, a gesture that still made Sophia's heart flutter with happiness. Her parents' love story had become legend among the foundation staff, proof that some bonds were strong enough to survive even the cruelest manipulation. There's something else, Thomas said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. This came today. Sophia recognized the official seal immediately. It was from the National Association of Family Services Organizations. She held her breath as Thomas opened it. The Lancaster Family Foundation has been selected to receive this year's Excellence in Family Preservation Award, he read aloud, in recognition of innovative programs that strengthen family bonds and prevent unnecessary separations. Elena gasped. Covering her mouth with her hands, Sophia felt tears spring to her eyes as the magnitude of the recognition hit her. We did it, she whispered. We actually did it. No, Thomas said, looking at his wife and daughter with infinite love. You did it. Both of you. You took the worst thing that ever happened to our family and turned it into something that helps other families stay together. As they celebrated their success, Sophia thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Eleanor's manipulation had cost them 27 years, but it had also shaped them into people who understood the precious nature of family bonds. Thomas's years of loneliness had made him appreciate every moment with his wife and daughter. Elena's struggle as a single mother had given her the empathy to help other women in crisis. Sophia's childhood without a father had motivated her to ensure other children didn't face the same loss. Want to go plant that tree now? Sophia asked suddenly. They'd been planning to add a new tree to their memorial garden, not for someone who had died, but for the family they'd been before Eleanor's interference, a symbolic burial of the life that was stolen so they could fully embrace the life they'd built together. The 3 of them walked outside to the small garden behind their building, where a young oak tree waited to be planted alongside the one they'd dedicated to Eleanor. This tree was different, though. It came with a plaque that read, "In honor of the Lancaster family that was, is, and always will be." As they took turns shoveling dirt around the tree's roots, Sophia marveled at how something so simple could feel so profound. They were planting more than a tree. They were establishing roots for future generations of their family, creating a living symbol of love's ability to survive any challenge. This tree will outlive all of us, Thomas said, as they packed the last of the soil around the trunk. Good, Elena replied, water streaming down her cheeks. It should be here to remind people that families can overcome anything if they love each other enough. Sophia looked at her parents, her father with his gentle strength and her mother with her fierce protective love, and felt the deep peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. 27 years ago, Eleanor Lancaster had tried to destroy their family because she believed love wasn't strong enough to overcome obstacles. She'd been wrong. Love didn't just overcome obstacles. It transformed them into stepping stones, building something even stronger than what came before. As the sun set over Asheville, the Lancaster family stood together beside their newly planted tree, their hands intertwined, their hearts finally home.